Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Miranda Barbour? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I'll put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. So first I'll look at the background in this case. I'll move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Miranda Barbour was born in North Pole, Alaska on December 14, 1994. At age 2, she was put in a cast because her hips were dislocated. She would remain this way for 2 years. At age 4, Miranda was traumatized. I'll talk more about that in the analysis. After the trauma, her family moved to another area in Alaska. She started going to a local school where she made a few friends, but overall she had trouble adjusting. At age 12, she started hanging around kids who were into Satanism. Miranda claimed that by the time she left North Pole, Alaska, she was a high-ranking member of a satanic cult. Her claim was unsubstantiated. At this point, we see she becomes promiscuous, she was using drugs, and ran away frequently. She was involved in several violent incidents in which she was the aggressor. Her family couldn't always figure out when Miranda was telling the truth. She engaged in a lot of fantasy. Her imagination was quite active. Eventually, Miranda's behavior became increasingly out of control. She was using heroin, lying all the time, and being manipulative. By age 13, she was being treated for ADHD, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and depression. Miranda's parents were divorced when she was 16 years old. Around this time, Miranda became pregnant. She did not know who the father was. Miranda was unhappy with her mother. She even wrote a letter to Phil McGraw in which she implied her mother had a substance use problem and may harm herself. A court ordered Miranda to live with her uncle and his soon-to-be wife. The couple took custody of Miranda in March of 2012. They moved to North Carolina. When Miranda was 9 months pregnant, she met a man named Elliot Barbour. Elliot was with another woman at that time who was also pregnant. He broke up with her and started seeing Miranda. He may have started seeing Miranda prior to the breakup. Miranda and Elliot were both active in Satanism. They really connected on this topic. The couple would get married on October 22, 2013. For some time, Miranda had been having sex with men for money. This continued after her marriage. In November of 2013, she answered a Craigslist advertisement featuring a man asking for some company. His name was Troy LaFerrera. He was 42 years old and married. For the last several years, he had been meeting with women he found through Craigslist and other websites. He was exchanging money for sex. Miranda and Troy agreed to meet on the evening of November 11, 2013. The price for Miranda's company was $100. This day was Elliot's 22nd birthday. Miranda and Elliot had decided to kill Troy LaFerrera. Their reason was because they wanted to murder someone together. Miranda and Elliot drove to a Denny's restaurant parking lot in the Susquehanna Valley Mall in Hummel's Wharf, Pennsylvania, to meet Troy. Elliot was hiding under a blanket in the back seat of the couple's Honda CR-V. Troy arrived at 9:36 p.m., driving his 1997 Chevy S10 pickup truck. After Troy paid Miranda, they started driving in the Honda CR-V to Sunbury, Pennsylvania, about 6 miles away to a rental property that Troy had owned. So Miranda was driving and Troy was in the passenger seat. Troy was supposed to be remodeling the property, but he had never started working on it. He simply used the property as a place to take women to have sex. Miranda and Troy had a conversation during the drive. Miranda had represented herself as 18 when she was really 19, but in the vehicle, she told Troy she was actually 16. Troy told Miranda that that was no problem for him. Miranda and Elliot had worked out a code phrase. When Miranda said, "Did you see the stars tonight?" her husband was supposed to spring into action and attack Troy. He was supposed to murder him. Miranda said the code phrase, but her husband did not respond. She crossed the Veterans Memorial Bridge into Sunbury. She repeated the phrase. but still no attack. This reminds me of the Frank Drebin character in Naked Gun 2.5. Frank Drebin was played by the actor Leslie Nielsen. He had a code phrase, "I love it," which he was supposed to use to request help from other officers. He was trying to find a way to work it into his narrative, and he said, "I've been swimming in raw sewage. I love it." Working a code phrase into a conversation isn't always easy. Miranda pulls up in front of the rental property owned by Troy and reaches behind her seat and hits her husband on the knee. At this point, Elliot attacks. He strangled Troy with a TV cable. Now, Troy was 6'2" and 278 pounds. He fought back vigorously, and Elliot was having a lot of difficulty managing him. At one point, he punched Elliot several times. He opened the vehicle door and managed to get one leg out. At this point, Miranda retrieved a knife from the center console and started to stab Troy. She was worried because when Troy opened the door, it activated the interior light. There was traffic on the road, and now people could see them. She ordered Elliot to exit the vehicle and close the passenger door, which he did by repeatedly banging it on Troy's leg until Troy pulled his leg back inside the vehicle. Troy was wheezing and gasping from the many stab wounds. The couple started to look for a place to dump him. They found an alley just 2 blocks away from Troy's property and pushed him out of the vehicle. It's not clear whether he died prior to this or after being pushed out, but either way he did die. His cause of death was the stab wounds. They cleaned the Honda with paper towels, carpet cleaner, and bleach wipes they purchased at a local Walmart. After they were done, they went to a local hamburger place and then drove to Harrisburg to visit a strip club. On their way to the club, a police officer pulled them over and gave them a ticket for a broken taillight. A neighbor found Troy's body the next day at 11:30 a.m. She immediately called the police. Miranda and her husband parked their vehicle a distance from that dump site and watched the police process the crime scene. Initially, the police did not have any suspects. They could not immediately access Troy's phone because it was locked. Once they were able to get into the phone, they found that the last phone call that Troy made was to a phone registered to Elliot Barbour. They realized that Miranda Barbour was the main user of that phone. They asked her to come down to the police station. She said that on the night of the murder, she was out with her husband in Harrisburg. The police didn't have any reason to detain her. Troy's Chevy S10 was found in the Susquehanna Valley Mall parking lot. Video surveillance shows that he pulled up to another vehicle. The images were blurry, so they couldn't make out any details, but the police were able to find the same vehicle on different surveillance cameras. They realized it was a Honda CR-V driven by Miranda and Elliot Barbour. This led them to the surveillance video from the Walmart, which featured Elliot buying cleaning supplies. The police once again questioned Miranda. She admitted to planning to meet Troy for sex, but said he never showed up. The police seized her phone. They had to wrestle it away from her. She stormed out of the police station. 2 hours later, the police interviewed her husband. He explained to the police that men used to pay Miranda for companionship, that she didn't exchange money for sex. This was a statement the police found impossible to believe. Elliot denied knowing anything about the case. Several hours later, early in the morning of December 3, Miranda voluntarily returned to the police station for another interview. She told the police that she had met with Troy and that he attacked her. She killed him in self-defense. She was arrested. The next day, Elliot is interviewed on television. He said that Miranda provided delightful conversation to unhappily married men who paid her between $50 and $850 just to talk and for her to listen. So he was really sticking with this narrative that Miranda was not a sex worker. Elliot was interviewed again on December 6. This time he confessed to murder. He had no remorse. He said that he and Miranda had no reason to kill. They simply decided to do it. Miranda would later say that she murdered Troy because he didn't change his mind when she claimed to be 16 years old. Miranda and Elliot were charged with first-degree murder and pleaded not guilty. During an interview in 2014, Miranda claimed that she killed 22 people mostly in Alaska, but also in California, Florida, Virginia, and Texas. There is no evidence that Miranda killed anyone other than the victim in Pennsylvania. Eventually, both Miranda and Elliot changed their pleas to guilty in an effort to avoid the death penalty. They were each sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now moving to my analysis. As far as mental health, Elliot had a history of schizophrenia. He said he was hearing voices from the age of 5. He overdosed on ecstasy at one point. People who knew him said he was never the same after that. His entire demeanor changed. As I mentioned in the background, Miranda had been treated for schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression, and ADHD starting at a young age. She had an IQ of 78, which is almost 1.5 standard deviations below the mean. Miranda started lying and manipulating from a young age, telling tales of satanic rituals, being attacked, and eventually being a serial killer, which of course she was not. In the background, I talked about how Miranda had been traumatized. She and her sister were sexually abused by her uncle when Miranda was 4 years old and her sister was 6. He would be convicted and sentenced to 19 years in prison with 5 years suspended. When he was released in 2007, he violated parole and went back to prison. This cycle repeated until eventually he was sentenced to 40 years in prison. It is very possible that Miranda's trauma history explains the many disorders for which she has been treated and potentially even her homicidal behavior. Now, Miranda did try to connect her history to the murder, that whole story about how she informed Troy that she was 16, but that didn't dissuade Troy, which led to Miranda killing him, like she was taking out a bad guy. She was cleaning up the world, as she would later imply. It's not clear if she really did tell Troy she was 16. That was her claim, but even if she did, I don't think that was her motive. I think the way her trauma history connects to the murder is probably through how the trauma destroyed her ability to set boundaries and regulate her emotions. Experiences like that cause confusion when trying to manage relationships. Sex is no longer something reserved for when two people have a genuine romantic connection. It's no longer at one end of the romantic continuum. Rather, it's something that's introduced very early in relationships or even in the absence of a relationship. It loses the traditional significance and becomes more of a commodity. Similarly, other emotionally charged actions, like attacking or killing someone, lose any type of special significance. They become relatively ordinary and mundane, something that can be done without much thought. In addition to not having the ability to set boundaries, Miranda was impulsive and sensation-seeking. Elliot was as well. They were not a good pair. They decided to commit murder just for the fun of it, just to have something to do. Troy's life had no value to them. Now moving to Troy LaFerrera. Troy struggled with what appeared to be some type of addiction to sex. He was on a number of websites looking for women, on Craigslist. He had that property he used exclusively for having sex. This seemed to be consuming his life. It was a major part of his identity. The next item I will look at is the sentencing. Was life in prison a reasonable sentence? Considering Miranda's history, I think a measure of mercy would have been in order, perhaps 25 years to life with the possibility of parole. Other than the schizophrenia diagnosis, there's not a lot of information about Elliot. He appeared to follow the orders of Miranda. She was really in charge. Therefore, I think the same sentence, 25 to life, would have been reasonable. I think the theme in this case is how people become trapped. The two perpetrators and the victim were all trapped in destructive behaviors. They had all set poor boundaries. They were all trying to satisfy their desires, no matter what the risk. Ultimately, all three of their lives would be destroyed. Those are my thoughts in the case of Miranda Barbour. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comments section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be interesting. Thanks for watching.